Happy Wednesday, everybody, and welcome to the Tommy John studio in New York City. This is Green Dot Daily, and I am your host, Charlie DiSturco. Caitlin Clark has absolutely dazzled since the Olympic break. Can she continue the hot streak and lead the Fever to a home win over A'ja Wilson and the Aces? Maria Marino joins me in the studio in just a second to talk about that. Also, can a video game successfully predict the outcome of college football games? Mike Calabrese joins me to talk more about what the NCAA Football 25 projects for Arizona, Kansas State. Spoiler alert, the simulation is 5-1 so far. And should you be worried about Oregon after the Ducks have barely held on to a win against Idaho and now Boise State? Collin Wilson and Brett McMurphy join me to talk all things CFB, including which ranked teams are on upset alert. But there's just over a week left in the world of the WNBA regular season, so we start there on this hump day. 3 games on the docket tonight if you want some late night hoops. Tipping off at 10 p.m. are the Storm and Sparks out in LA. The Storm sit 12.5-point favorites and comfortably inside the top 5 of the WNBA standings with just over a week to play in the regular season. Total for this one sits at 162.5. Perhaps the most interesting game of the night, at least from a postseason perspective, the Washington Mystics head to Chicago to take on the Sky. Remember, Angel Reese is out for the season in this one for the Sky, who enter 1-point underdogs and sit in that 8 seed spot, holding a tight lead over the Dream and Mystics. Total for this one is the lowest of the slate at 160.5. And last but not least, we have the Las Vegas Aces and likely MVP A'ja Wilson heading to Indiana to take on a surging Caitlin Clark and the Fever. Vegas enters slight 3.5-point favorites in this one with the highest total on the board at 178.5. Clark, for what it's worth, has scored 24-plus points in each of her last 5. As we welcome in Maria Marino to the Tommy John studio in New York City. Maria, we have to talk about this Vegas-Indiana game. 2 offensive heavyweights between Wilson and Clark. Sharp money is poured in on Vegas. We saw they were 1.5-point favorites all the way up to 3.5 here. What do you think about this line movement, and do you agree with it?
Oh, this is a juicy matchup tonight. I'm pretty excited about it. As far as the line movement, I'm a little bit surprised. I'm not 100% sure how to feel about it. I do think it makes sense that Vegas is favored by a few points.
Right.
Earlier in the season, these two teams played twice. Both times, Vegas was favored by double digits, and they covered both times. But, I mean, the Fever are a completely different team at this point in time. I mean, they're the second best team since the Olympic break. And what's crazy to me, apart from how Caitlin Clark has played herself into a legitimate MVP candidate just because of the attention she commands, just the pace that she is able to dictate and the ability that she has to find her teammates. Even though the Fever started the season 1-8, they have somehow managed to become a top 3 offense only behind New York and Minnesota in terms of points per game. And they have the best field goal percentage in the league at 45.2%. So this is a legitimate team now. Meanwhile, Vegas, they've been a bit inconsistent. Right. 6-5 since the break. Now, A'ja Wilson is definitely a scary matchup problem for anyone. Yeah. And I think she could be rested here. She didn't play in Las Vegas's last game against New York. Also, I mean, A'ja is known to be somebody, she gets motivated by, various conversation. I think she's going to want to assert that, hey, I am definitely still the MVP. I'm going to go in and, assert my will and dominance against Indiana. So because of all of those reasons, I'm actually staying away from the spread here.
It makes sense to stay away. And listen, I understand, and I think, even if you wanted to look at A'ja Wilson alt lines because of the motivation, we've seen her drop 40 points multiple times in the past couple of weeks. And there's no doubt in my mind that she's the MVP here and she's going to be great. But also Caitlin Clark, no doubt in my mind that she eventually wins an MVP down the road based on video game-like numbers. And finally, it felt like, the first couple of weeks she's adjusting to the W play. Absolutely just taken off since then. So from that regard, it'll be extremely fun to watch. But you in particular in this matchup, I need a best bet from you here.
Sure.
Now, no Caitlin Clark, No Asia Wilson. We're going with Kelsey Mitchell here. Tell me why you like her tonight.
Well, part of the reason the Fever have been so good is because Kelsey Mitchell has delivered time and time again. I talked about just how good, Caitlin has gotten at distributing the ball, as well as her teammates, actually. But Kelsey Mitchell has just been a scoring machine. So I found her over 20.5 points to be a nice little bet at, I think it's around minus 120. I would play this actually up to 21.5, which you might be able to get at plus money. So she has gone over 20.5 in 9 of her last 10 games. If you boost that up to 21.5, it's still over in 7 of her last 10. Now, in that span, she is averaging 24.9 points per game on more than 50% shooting from the field. Also, I talked about how much this team is different from the beginning of the season, but when they did play Vegas the last time in July, she did score 23, and that was in a game that the Fever lost by 19. I'm expecting this to be a competitive game, and the spread is telling you that this should be tightly contested. And if the Fever are going to compete, and by the way, they're super dangerous on their home floor, Kelsey Mitchell has to perform, and she's just been so consistent. She has just answered the bell. So I'm trusting in Kelsey Mitchell here to get 21, 22 points in this game.
I like this look here. And listen, you mentioned it. Everyone's looking at Asia. Everyone's looking at Caitlin Clark. Kelsey Mitchell should be able to get plenty of open looks if there's double teams Caitlin's way. We've seen she's an absolute incredible passer. She creates so much.
Yeah.
So from that regard, it makes sense that, Kelsey Mitchell as the number 2 option can really have a great night. But the other game I want to talk about with you, Maria, is the game I mentioned earlier, Mystics at Sky, mostly because this is a game with playoff implications. And I actually think this one's so interesting, too, because I mentioned the Vegas Aces line movement. Well, the Sky opened at -4 a couple days ago. That line has just trickled all the way down to +1. So I guess I asked you, that's an insane line movement over 48 hours. Do you buy the dip on the Sky here without Angel Reese obviously playing?
I do. I mean, I was hesitant, seeing the Sky favored. But as soon as I saw that go down to them being the underdog, I'm like, I got to grab this on the money line here. Look, the Sky are at home, and I just feel like the Sky have more to lose when it comes to this playoff race. What does that mean? Okay, both of these teams are still alive in the playoff race, but the Sky have been sitting in the 8th and final playoff spot pretty much the entire season, whereas the Washington Mystics, they have not had playoff expectations pretty much this entire season. So I really feel like it would be a much bigger disappointment if the Sky were to fall off here at the very end of the season versus the Mystics, who we've pretty much resigned to not making the playoffs for a while. Washington is only 2 games back of Chicago. Now, here's the other thing. Angel Reese is out for the remainder of the season with a wrist injury. That changes things, yes, but I was encouraged by Chicago's last game against Dallas. In fact, even without Angel Reese, they were able to get a win, and they actually had even more of a balanced scoring attack. I noticed that 5 of their players scored in double figures, including Kennedy Carter, who scored 28. And that's kind of my final point about this. I just believe in Kennedy Carter. Like, she has, since she came back from an illness, has made it clear, let's make a run. Let's get into the playoffs. Let's salvage this season. And I personally feel like she is one of the best scoring talents in the league. And when she gets it going, she is incredibly hard to stop. She's virtually unguardable, especially in the mid-range. So I think she's going to continue to show out here. I feel like this is essentially a pick'em between 2 teams that, if you look at their, offensive numbers, defensive numbers, they're pretty similar. Give me the home team. Give me Chicago to stay in this race.
They say pressure makes diamonds, and Chicago dealing with this adversity. No Reese getting the job done makes sense to me. So Maria Marino, the Sky defending their home floor, and a little bit of Kelsey Mitchell on the side. A great slate tonight with just over a week left in the regular season of the W. Maria, thank you so much, and we'll see you soon with the playoffs.
Yeah, thank you. Let's go Sky. Let's go Kelsey Mitchell, I believe.
Last season at the Favorites podcast, they ran a free $100,000 NFL Pick'em contest, and people went nuts for it. They just announced they are bringing it back. You make 5 NFL picks a week. It's totally free to sign up. There's cash prizes for the top 10 finishers, a $40,000 first place prize, $100,000 prize pool, and thousands up for grab each week. Go to favorites.actionnetwork.com. Do not miss out.
And I really just don't see how you do this. I don't see how you come out and throw your own guys under the bus that you're working with, grinding with every single week in and week out. This is something you don't do. I mean, your guys are your guys. You're supposed to rock with them through thick and thin. Obviously, frustrations and things arise. But, for me and my instances in my time in the past, your O-line or your guys who ride with you, who rock with you, anytime your quarterback gets hit late, the first person that you see there, your O-lineman, this is something that may make some of those guys really hesitant to pick you up after a couple people may bang you around on the defensive side. So definitely something that's alarming. You don't see this very much. And if I was O-lineman in Colorado, I'd be absolutely pissed.
Johnny, you never threw your offensive line under the bus in Cleveland, did you? I was looking like your pressure rate was insane. Like it was so high.
No, I think I had guys like Joe Thomas and guys that will come back out to the parking lot and your car will be on fucking bricks if you did something like that. I can't imagine what that. I mean, I think just because it's Deion's show, I mean, I guess they're just going to keep getting away with it. But man, as for him to smile as he sit there and say it too as well was something that was kind of just like mind blowing to me.
Over to the gridiron, and let's take an updated look at how Brett's AP Top 5 stacks up against Collin's power ratings. Just like last week, Georgia sits atop the #1 spot, but there are some changes throughout. Of note, Oregon has continued to fall down Brett's rankings. Entering as a preseason #1, the Ducks fell to 3 last week, now sit outside of the top 5, and replacing them are the Miami Hurricanes as Cam Ward continues to dazzle. But like Miami, like most teams inside the top 25, as we welcome in Collin Wilson and Brett McMurphy now to talk about college football, the Hurricanes are near 7 touchdown favorites, and that kind of feels like the takeaway. A lot of ranked teams with a lot of high spreads. But let's take a step back. Let's look at, the college football playoff as a whole with this weekend, because, a loss against an unranked team in a high spread could lead to some doubt come the CFP. Brett, I'll start with you. What team or what game in particular do you think has the biggest playoff implications?
Friday night, Arizona's at Kansas State. The Wildcats are 7-point favorites, and the Wildcats are 7-point underdogs. See what I did there?
Yeah.
This is actually a non-conference game. It was scheduled a few years ago before conference realignment, but now that they're both in the same conference, the schools decided to keep the game, but it will not count in the conference standings. Well, why is that significant? The winner of this game could come into play later in the season, because what if the loser of this game actually fares better in the conference standings, gets to the Big 12 title game, either wins or loses the Big 12 title game? Well, the winner of this game would have the head-to-head, quote, tiebreaker, although it wouldn't impact the conference standings. That could come into play, and I think that would be relevant to the College Football Playoff Selection Committee if you're judging Arizona and Kansas State later in the year on who wins this game in September.
It will be interesting to see how this game plays out. It really feels like this is the marquee matchup. There's only 2 ranked games total on this slate. Collin, I'm going to kick it to you next. No Texas, Michigan, no Tennessee, NC State like last weekend, but it might be a blessing because those were stinkers. What game do you think in particular has the biggest playoff implications?
Well, it's interesting that Brett mentioned a Big 12 team, because a Big 12 game was exactly at the top of my list. People don't understand that half of that conference can win the conference championship and get themselves a top 4 seed in the playoff. That makes these contenders that are outside of Oklahoma State and Kansas State, it makes every game crucial. So the biggest game of the weekend is Central Florida going on to take on TCU. Now, TCU is looking to restore some magic, what they had 2 years ago. Meanwhile, UCF is just trying to belong with a just powder keg full of talent that they got through the transfer portal. But the difference in this game is going to be what UCF does on the ground with a running back that they had last year, and that's R.J. Harvey, who just had 4 touchdowns last week, but he has 6 on the season. He has some sort of crazy 7 yards after contact right now. And when you consider what the Gus Malzahn Wildcat is, it's inside zone read with KJ Jefferson, a play in the offensive playbook that was tailor-made for him. But R.J. Harvey is creating all these yards, creating all these touchdowns strictly off of inside zone. If you turn around and look at TCU's defensive line, it hasn't gone real well from a run defense perspective. I expect UCF to eat TCU's defensive line all day. And then on the other side, the Frogs, Josh Hoover is an interesting passer. He has some coverage looks where he's pretty good. He's pretty good against cover 1. He's pretty good against cover 2. He's horrific when you go cover 6, cover 4, quarters, cover 3. UCF only plays a strict cover 3, especially with Ted Roof there now as defensive coordinator, to stop explosive passes. I think UCF's going to have their way on the road, and they are going to put a leg up in the Big 12 and stake their claim as we are for real and can make the playoff.
We're going to have more on this game and also Arizona, Kansas State in just a sec. But I need to pull back a little bit, guys. I need to ask a question. Brett, don't come at me too hard for asking this one, but Oregon, it was not a great game against Boise State. They were near 20-point favorites, ended up having to go on to the last drive, the last play of the game, a game-winning field goal for the Ducks. After a scare in week 1 also against Idaho, if it weren't for 2 special teams, we could be looking at the Ducks being 1-1, this big, bad Oregon team from the Pac-12 coming over, changing conferences and expecting to win. And is there any concern at all? I'll ask you first, Collin. Should we be concerned for Dan Lanning's Ducks?
The answer is no. I know it looks bad right now, and I've dropped them in the power ratings. I think they're down to 7th if you like the overall power rating rank, but they're 10 points behind Georgia on a neutral field right now if they were to play each other. But why am I not sweating any Oregon futures or any Oregon tickets? Because the problems that they have can be fixed. If you think of LSU in 2019, the defense was giving up 30 to everybody. They gave up 30 to Vanderbilt. And then Dave Aranda, who was the defensive coordinator at the time, made changes to tackling, angles, everything on the defense, and it completely revamped that LSU defense, and they turned things around. When you look on the offensive side, the offensive line has had some guys move around, playing not in their natural positions. Dylan Gabriel's had pressure. He's been a little bit off sync. Once they get healthy on the offensive line, once the fundamentals come back and tackling on the defense, you're going to see a different Oregon team. So, we've seen Oklahoma State lose to South Alabama last year. Just sometimes these teams need a couple games to get in sync, and I think that's where Oregon is. There is no lack of talent, and there is no lack of coaching with this entire program.
Yeah, that last week game against Boise State, had the team total over, had the guy on the deep route. We didn't even deserve it, Collin. Had 2 go routes and overthrew him. Made me go ballistic at like 1 a.m. just in the corner of my bedroom. But Listen, Brett, we talk about Oregon, and Collin just mentioned the offensive line and how that's changing up. They allowed 5 sacks last season, have already allowed 7 in 2 games to Gabriel this year. I know you had them number 1. For sure, the talent's there. They've continued to fall down with some questionable games. Are you worried at all about Oregon's future?
No, look, we'll see if they're going to win the Big Ten or not. Ohio State, comes to Eugene later in the season. But ultimately, I think they've got too much talent, kind of what Collin addressed, that they will end up in the playoffs somewhere, somehow. They're going to make the 12-team field. It is surprising, though, that, like you guys touched on, the offensive line has really struggled. And that Lanning told me this offseason, that was supposed to be a strength. And you kind of saw against Boise State, like you said, Charlie, they had 2 kickoff returns for touchdowns. Look, Boise should have won that game. They deserved to win that game, no question about it. But Lanning made a more concerted effort to run the ball, kind of the stretch runs out to the corner, and had some success there. But ultimately, if they can't protect Gabriel, that's really going to limit what they can do offensively. I think they'll be fine. They've got to improve. They can't play like this and have a chance to make the playoff. But like Collin said, I think they will improve. Charlie, I'm just glad after you asked me last week if Dabo Swinney was on the hot seat, if you're going to ask me if Lanning was on the hot seat, because you read it on the left side of Twitter somewhere. But Lanning's job security is fine. Dabo won by 70, so he's fine for another week. So looking forward to this week of college football.
Yeah, Clemson looked really good. And listen, the left side of Twitter is more saying stuff about Dylan Gabriel and how bad he is under center and how he was ridiculous that he wasn't. Now he was the number 1 in the Heisman, but, I digress. We'll stay off the left side. We'll talk about, this weekend's slate as a whole. And listen, last week we saw Notre Dame go down to NIU. No one thought that was going to happen after Notre Dame went and beat Texas A&M. We thought that they were going to then, just sail off into the sunset into the college football playoff. Well, how about this week? You look at the matchups. There's only 2 teams from Friday and Saturday with a spread, at least for ranked teams, under 10 points. So I ask you guys, and Collin, I'll start with you first. Who is the team that's on upset alert when it comes to ranked play?
Well, we mentioned the game already, but it's going to be Friday night with Kansas State hosting the Red Cats. Yes, Arizona is whipping out these red helmets, red uniforms. It's going to be, they actually look pretty beautiful. But when you look at where Kansas State has had problems so far this season, they're 128th in defensive passing success rate. Their coverage has not been good. It's outside the top 75 as graded by PFF. And you say, Well, what's the Arizona offense? Well, Noah Fafita hitting Tedoroa all the way down the field and taking advantage of teams that can't defend in coverage has been a problem for Kansas State, and that's exactly where Arizona's going to attack. So I know the number has come off 7. It's gone back up to 7.5. Even I power rate this around 8 or 9, so I can understand the buyback here on Kansas State. But Arizona has the ingredients on offense to put a real scare into Kansas State on Friday night.
Brett, how about you? I know, this is an interesting game that you're going with, and I actually think it could happen. Tell me more about why you think Oklahoma in particular could be on upset alert.
Yeah, Oklahoma's got major injury issues. I actually just talked to an Oklahoma source 10 minutes ago, and they were playing their 4th-string center last week against Houston. And they said, look, even if we would have won that game by 4 touchdowns, we still have some issues injury-wise. They have to get this stuff figured out. Can they get it figured out in, less than a week? It's doubtful. Also, not that they're overlooking Tulane, because Tulane's a quality team, but next week, Josh Heupel, the last quarterback to win a national championship at OU, comes to town. It's OU's SEC opener. That is going to be the biggest game and biggest home game in school history. If they're slightly peeking ahead to that, if they still have these injury issues, Tulane's the kind of team that can go into Norman and upset the Sooners. That last week, they did lose to Kansas State. They outgained Kansas State by over 100 yards, yet lost at home. This is a dangerous, dangerous spot for the Sooners.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. And you mentioned the Tulane gave Kansas State a run for its money. This number opened over 2 touchdowns, come down now to about 13.5 in the market. So there's definitely some, Tulane money pouring in, and it's definitely a concern. Oklahoma, they're stuffed at the line on the run game, and Jackson Arnold just 174 yards, 19 of 32 last week in a scare against Houston. But of course, guys, we can't let you go without a best bet. We're taking a long shot here by picking out upsets, but we need an actual bet for the weekend slate. Brett, you're up first. You're heading back to the big house, fresh off a Michigan loss, drubbing of Texas, and you like Arkansas State to hang here.
Yeah, Arkansas State getting 24. Look, Michigan all offseason, they were prepping, they were preparing for the Texas game. They didn't show anything against Fresno State. Guess what? They didn't show anything against Texas either. So maybe they really don't have anything. For Arkansas State quarterback Jalen Renor, can he possibly get Butch Jones's, the fighting Butch Jones? Can they get the double figures? I think if they can, then you're asking a Michigan offense to score 5 or 6 touchdowns. I don't think they can do that. This is a huge, huge sandwich spot. Who's on deck for Michigan? Some team named USC. Yeah, you're playing between Texas and USC, and you're playing Arkansas State. This is kind of like when you're invited to go to something and you're forced to go to it and you don't want to go. You have to go, and you're just, all right, I'll go. It's kind of like Michigan playing Arkansas State this week. All right, we got to play them this week. I think it stays close. I don't think Arkansas State's going to pull an NIU by any means, but I'll take the 24 and take my chances that Arkansas State can get on the board and make Michigan put up 5 or 6 touchdowns.
Listen, Brett, I mean, you might be able to have an open tryout and start at quarterback for Michigan based on how their quarterback play has gone through the opening couple of weeks. But Collin, your best bet, we mentioned the UCF game, TCU, how important that one is in playoff implications, and you like UCF to get the job done.
I do, for a lot of the reasons I spoke of before. And I almost took Florida in this spot against Texas A&M with the points, but you guys, everyone can download the BBOC podcast tomorrow when Stuckey and I get done chopping it up, because I think I'm going to be on the Gators. But here we're going to take UCF for all the things that I mentioned before. But let me throw out one more stat about what happened at TCU in week 1 against Stanford. If you go and look at quarterback Ashton Daniels, he had 114 yards rushing. 57 of those came off designed run attempts. That's Ashton Daniels of Stanford with no offensive line. You're going to be able to handle KJ Jefferson when he pulls back on the inside zone read and decides to handle it himself at 260 pounds. I don't think it's going to be a good game for TCU's defensive line whatsoever. If Stanford can run wild with a quarterback on TCU's defensive line, so can UCF. So give me the Knights.
If you're having a bingo card at home, we had mention of the left side of Twitter. We've had an Arkansas player reference with KJ Jefferson. Collin had to get that in there with UCF, but definitely feels like a great spot. Both undefeated teams, and TCU surviving the scare against Stanford, but really has looked a bit concerning here through the opening couple of weeks. But Collin Wilson, Brett McMurphy, thank you so much for hopping on, and we'll talk to you guys next week. We'll take advantage of the day off from football today because starting tomorrow, we have 5 straight days of football once again, including this Friday night game between Arizona and Kansas State. We talked to Collin and Brett on how K-State could be on upset alert at 7.5-point favorites, and the public seems to agree. 80% of the money coming in on Arizona. The total is nearing 60. As well as we welcome in Mike Calabrese to break down this game from a simulation perspective. We're back, Mike. Every week you come on here, you break down the game on NCAA Football 25. Turns out that a video game simulation is sharper than just about any of us that has walked the earth. It is a whopping 3-0 on totals, over under, and 2-1 on sides. So I need to know, a Friday night game, ranked 1, what does the simulation say?
All right, I won't, tease this out and build up the drama. Arizona pulling the upset, played basically flawless end to end. They win 48-27 on the road in the Little Apple. They jumped out early on the Wildcats using a pick 6 to build up a 17-7 lead at the end of the first quarter. Surprisingly, they ran the ball better than Kansas State, and that's really the Wildcats' bread and butter. They didn't rely as heavily on T-Mac. You saw that in week 1. He goes for that monster game against New Mexico, and then they don't use him at all against Northern Arizona in week 2. It was similar in this game, although he did have a touchdown. They won the turnover battle, which is critical, 3-1 in terms of turnovers. They also came up with a pair of 4th down stops as KSU was trying to mount a second half comeback. The closest the Wildcats would get in the second half was 41-27, but Noah Fafita perfectly pulled a ball on an RPO and found Montana Lamonius Craig on the outside for a critical first down that led to a game-clinching touchdown with a few minutes left. So the Wildcats not only cover the spread, they win outright as a pretty big dog here to get Big 12 play started.
Right, this total is, nearing 60, and they say 48 points, the simulation says, for Arizona. My question to you, my follow-up here is, as someone who's looking at this game and trying to break it down, I bet on Arizona in week 1. I bet their spread and their team total over. They cleared the team total with ease, gave up 39 points to New Mexico. My worry is that they can't stop Kansas State. Why would I not take the team total over here, or would you say, I'm right in that regard?
Arizona, there's nothing they can do in terms of their defensive liabilities. I agree with you in that regard. And also last week's box score against Northern Arizona, an FCS opponent in state, they clearly wanted to save things. They didn't want to put anything on film that gave K-State an advantage in their first conference game. So I'm basically throwing that whole game out. Yes, it was a lot lower scoring. I think they're going to be a lot closer in terms of the brand of football they want to play as they were in week 1 against New Mexico. That game was one of the highest scoring of the entire season in college football. And if they're going to win, I think that's the brand of football that they have to play and really force a K-State team to abandon the run game as they had to in the simulation. Because if it's Giddens, if it's Avery Johnson on quarterback powers and in the zone read game, I think that's problematic for an Arizona team that is really, they need to build a lot defensively, not only against the pass, but also being able to tackle all the way down to the fundamentals. If you're in one-on-one situations, I like K-State in the run game to get it done.
Yeah, I'm just very nervous about Arizona's defense, knowing what I saw week 1. And the one thing I saw was that their offense, Arizona's that is, was absolutely dominant. So when I look at this, and the simulation also undefeated on totals, saying that this game is going to go over, my thought is, you know what, I could see the upset happening, but I think I might just take the 24.5. I think Arizona can get more than a couple of scores here. But the other team...
One thing I'll say just to close, I do think that this number in real life, not in the simulation, is predicated on the fact that K-State is the best performing home team against the spread in the past 15 years, in not only in the Big 12, they're the second best in the entire country, only trailing Georgia Southern. So among Power 4 teams, K-State has been a printing press when it comes to covering numbers at Bill Snyder Stadium. But I think that it kind of adds to this, them being a tiny bit overvalued. As soon as it crept over the touchdown, I was interested in the Wildcats.
Yeah,
the Wildcats.
The
of
Wildcats
Arizona.
against the Wildcats. Either way, the Wildcats are going to cover this matchup. The same, I don't know, can be said for the Arizona State Sun Devils, who play tomorrow night. In case you want a little break before Thursday night football starts, you want an appetizer. Arizona State, Texas State at 7:30 p.m. Why watch NFL when we've got college football, baby? Mike, where are you headed for your best bet in this one?
I'm going over 60 in this matchup. A rare Power 4 team traveling midweek to play against a Group of 5 team. Texas State is going to have a sellout. It's going to be electric. This is a team that has college football playoff aspirations. I gave them out in the preseason at 16-1. They're coming off one of their best performances in years, a 49-10 drubbing of UTSA. And what did they do in that game? They were able to get on UTSA early and make them abandon the run. And that's critical because Texas State is not very stout in their front. And that game flow really benefited them in that situation. Whereas Arizona State playing against an SEC team last week, they were able to stick with the run, just sledgehammer the Bulldogs. Cam Scatabo goes for 262 on 33 carries. I think he's in for another game over 2 Bills in this situation against the Bobcats front 6 that I think is really good when it comes to havoc and getting after the quarterback. But if it's just lining up hat on a hat, I think the Sun Devils are going to be able to move the football. And critically, in the red zone, I think they're going to be able to finish drives in the end zone, not have to rely on their field goal kicker. So going over 60 for a team like Texas State that can kind of ebb and flow pace-wise depending on how things are going. Last year, they were one of the best teams in the country in terms of offensive balance between the pass and the run. But if they're trailing, I think you'll see them go from about the mid-40s in tempo to match an Arizona State offense that's top 25 in tempo. And if it's up and down, back and forth, 90-degree weather in San Marcos, even at night, I think these defenses are going to wilt in the second half, and you're going to see this game played in the 70s.
Fireworks expected. This is such an interesting game, especially Arizona State, just 1.5-point favorites at Texas State. As you mentioned, some postseason aspirations for them. Really going to be interesting. And also, we're just in the best time of the year. Like Thursday, we got Thursday night football, we got college football, 5 days straight of football, and soon we're going to get basically every single day. But another game on that Friday, we talked about Arizona and Kansas State, obviously the marquee matchup of the day. But Kansas also plays against UNLV. They're right around 7-point favorites. And this is, one of your favorite underdogs of the weekend. You think UNLV is more than live heading into Kansas?
Yeah, forget about the points. Give me the money line. Anything north of 2-1. I saw plus 230 out there in the market. Grab the running Rebs here because the loss of offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki has been devastating to this Jayhawk offense. Daniels, their quarterback, has looked lost. He's thrown 4 interceptions through 2 games. And essentially his offense, it was the appearance of sophistication. A lot of motion, a lot of pre-snap eye candy. But at the end of the day, they ran their core offense like a Swiss watch. They didn't make mistakes. When they got into scoring territory, when they crossed opponents' 40-yard lines, they were finishing those drives with points and, in most cases, touchdowns. They have not been that consistent offense this year. You look at that game against Illinois last week, I think that was them being exposed closer to a 5-7 team as opposed to a team that potentially could vie for a Big 12 championship. And then on the other side, you got UNLV. They have the makeup of an underdog that wins outright because they take chances offensively. Matt Sluka comes down from Holy Cross at the FCS level, and he's a boomer bust passer. He's completed 14 passes the entire season. 5 have gone for touchdowns. And critically, he is a plus runner. So if they don't spy him and they don't take him seriously, or they try to slant and take away some easy runs from this go-go offense of Brennan Marion, he's going to pull the ball. He's going to be out the back of the offensive line. He's going to hit some really big runs. So I think UNLV is much closer to, let's call it a field goal underdog in this game, as opposed to that critical number of 7. So grabbing the key number, I would advise, but also on the money line, let's roll the dice with the running Rebs.
I love this. Kansas and Daniels had such high aspirations, lost Illinois, have not looked good yet. And you mentioned UNLV's success so far. Going into Houston and absolutely beating down the Cats. So another opportunity here, this time going into Lawrence. Mike Calabrese, appreciate you hopping on, and let's see if the simulation can continue its sharp go.
Thanks for having me, Charlie.
I am firmly dead center on Aaron Rodgers Island, RELAX. I thought he looked great on Monday night. He had all the timing throws with Garrett Wilson, got the free play touchdown, the classic Aaron Rodgers.
Classic.
How many quarterbacks did you see this weekend that are definitely better than Aaron Rodgers right now? Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen. I don't know if there's any other guys. Like, I can make a case for other guys, but are definitely better. Joe Burrow sure didn't look better right now. I don't know. Like, Aaron Rodgers.
Give some love to Baker Mayfield, the best QB this week, right?
Yeah, Baker, right? Exactly. That's what we're looking at. Derek Carr. Like, this is the thing.
Yeah, but even Lamar as a passer wasn't great Thursday.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
To me, this
take it home.
This was clearly like Rodgers is good. If I like Rodgers coming into the season, I feel better, not worse, after last night. He looked good. Compare it to Kirk Cousins, the Achilles injury twins. These are not twins. One guy can't move at all, can't make any throws. Rodgers looks good. The Jets' defense stunk. The Jets' run offense stunk. The coaching wasn't great. All that's not going to go anywhere, but guess what? Defenses stink against the Niners. 42-10 against the Cowboys last year. 42-19 against the Eagles. 33-17 against Miami the year before. They're 22-2 with Trent Williams over that span. Their actual MVP, not the running back, though, sitting out last night. The Niners are really good. Like, I'm not jumping off the island just because they lost to the Niners, who are all about timing and knowing what they're doing, and the Shanahan system works. In MVP odds, Aaron Rodgers is still behind Jared Goff and Tua Tagovailoa. Get all the way out of here. I'm doubling down 25-1. I still like the Jets. I like Rodgers more. MVP, I still think it's happening.
If you want access to all of Action Pro projections, make sure to sign up for our annual subscription that is currently on sale. Access includes exclusive player prop picks from Sean Kerner and the other members of the Action Analytics team, and Action Pro just keeps getting better. You'll now get Sean Kerner's anytime touchdown projections, allowing users to quickly see the biggest TD edges for the upcoming NFL slate. To sign up, visit actionnetwork.com/pro today and use code GDD20 at signup. One more time, that's GDD20 at signup for $20 off. And just a reminder that any pick we give out here on the show, you can easily reference by following us in that award-winning Action Network app at the handle @green.daily to see all of our picks. We keep track so you don't have to. And that is going to be all for this Wednesday. Enjoy the day off, everyone. We have 5 days of football coming up, including Thursday Night Football between the Dolphins and the Bills. We'll be back here at 3 p.m. Eastern to break that down. We'll get Sean Kerner's prop, we'll get a same game parlay, and much more. So rest up and get ready. Have a great rest of your day.